Welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Steve Chiama, and I'm the owner of the Action Coach franchise here in Fairfax, Virginia. And I'm your host today of the Business Spotlight podcast. And today I have the pleasure to introduce Ricardo Belmar, the founder, host, and producer of the Retail Razor, as my guest. Today we're going to talk about Ricardo's business, his journey into business ownership, some of the challenges, best practices, share a peek into what it's really like to build and operate a business. So if this is your first time on the channel, be sure to like and subscribe to get notifications when a new show like this drops. So Ricardo, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. And if you would, please give us a little bit of background about who you are and tell us a little bit about your business, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. So, as you mentioned, my name of my business is Retail Razor, and it's basically a podcast network that I've built. It's focusing on the retail industry, so hence the retail part of the name. And Basically, what we do is we create content. I think of this business as a B2B media services business. Our main function is leveraging the podcast format, both audio, video, short formats, long formats, sometimes live streaming to go with it. Sometimes it's custom video production work that we may do at a live event with a client. And our goal is really to just deliver content that we know on the retail audience. And by that, I mean, people who work in retail. So it could be retail executives in the C-suite. It could be people who are in technology in retail, but fundamentally it's people who work at retail organizations. So at all the stores that we all, shop at and buy things at and how they run that business. And I focus on different aspects of that. So for example, things like technology strategy, there's always new technology coming out. And retail is one of the industries where historically they had been a little slow to adopt technology. In recent years, that's kind of been turned on its ear, and like retail is now one of these industries where they jump at the chance to adopt technology, sometimes too quickly, versus not quickly enough. And so I focus a lot on do you do that? What's a good way to adopt technology? And then on the other end of the spectrum, we also do content around what I call, how to be a better retail leader. What are the leadership skills that a retail executive should have or should strive for, right, to run their business, to lead and manage people in their business. And then we do things like, we work with other people in the industry, people that I draw on from my network, particularly industry analysts who are doing research into the industry. And we feature and highlight that research as a way to kind of help, again, educate and bring information to our target retailer audience that they can benefit from. So while that's my target audience, I really built the business in search of different companies who are really selling into those retail businesses with either their own technology or their own services. And they're the people that I'm looking for things like, co-creating content that we collaborate on, or they just want to become a sponsor of content that I'm already creating. And that's really the model that I'm kind of built that up for.
Awesome, awesome. Just for context, and let's just kind of build a basis for this. How did you structure this at the beginning? Did
Mhm.
you have investors, partners?
Mhm.
There's an awful lot of
Yeah.
equipment that can be in
Yeah.
this game
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not exactly easy and cheap to get.
Right. Yeah.
How did you get this started?
So interestingly, I actually started this more as a side journey or hobby while I was working in other corporate roles. In fact, it was during the pandemic that myself and a handful of other people who, like me, we were active thought leaders in the retail industry. And during the pandemic, we decided, maybe it's a good time to actually talk about the issues and challenges in this industry.
Mhm.
And it's a little, some people don't remember now, but actually during the pandemic, there were these new kinds of audio-based social media apps like Clubhouse that came out where they were live audio rooms that you could join and have discussions. So a group of us formed one of those to talk about retail challenges. And every
Mhm.
week we would basically put a show together and invite people to come and just, ask questions, listen, and we talk about different trends happening in the industry. And at one point while we were doing that, it kind of occurred to me, this would make an interesting podcast. Because, there were people who aren't going to show up for the live session, but would probably want to hear what we're talking about. So I started recording them and created a podcast called The Retail
Hmm.
Razor Show.
Hmm.
I just started releasing that pretty irregularly. I mean, originally it was maybe once a month. Sometimes if 6 weeks would go by. It really just depended
Hmm.
on when there was an opportunity to do it because I just started, like I said, as a hobby. And I kept doing that over the years. One of the folks that I started that original Clubhouse room with, she became the co-host with me on the podcast. And then over the next couple of years, because it was a hobby, I kind of gradually started getting the necessary equipment. So I started out with, a really inexpensive microphone as an
Yeah,
example, right? I
right.
started buying better and better equipment as we got on and I got more into it. And I had to learn a lot, right, about what does it mean to do a podcast. At first, I kind of
Hmm.
felt like I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, isn't that kind of, it must be an easy thing to do. All you need to do is record yourself talking. And over time, I kind of learned, yeah, there's a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so over the years, I'm coming up on a 5 year anniversary of when the podcast started this fall. And I would say probably about a year and a half ago, I thought, this probably is something that I could turn into. Originally, I thought it would be a side business,
Hmm.
to be honest, because again, it wasn't a regular weekly thing that I was doing. And thought, yeah, maybe I can find some sponsors that would be interested in reaching the audience I've built up, and that would be an interesting kind of side business to do. So then last summer, as I got my company I was with got caught in a layoff there, along with a lot of other people. I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity
Hmm.
to actually take what I originally was going to build as a side business and make it the really my real primary business and build it up from
Hmm.
there. So that's kind of what got last summer. I started taking that path, and that's where I am now is continuing to build that up as a business. We have our first sponsor signed with us a couple of months ago. And then we actually built it out. So now I have not just the original show, but it's actually 4 podcasts that I produce in the podcast network.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's play around a little bit further with this. As you're evolving this business and growing this, um, when you start up, you got to wear a
Mhm.
lot of hats.
Yeah.
Yeah, marketing hat, sales hat, production hat, and even within production, there's a whole bunch of hats.
Mhm.
Yeah, finance hat, all those kinds of hats. Which are the ones you're wearing now?
The short answer is probably all of the above. Yeah, so since I kind of started, I came from this, starting from this as a hobby that grew into a primary business.
Hmm.
I've taken the approach of, made the active decision that I did not seek out investors to help fund it. I've basically been
Hmm.
self-funding things like the equipment, software service and things that I need. Uh, and until I found, and I decided, I'm going to do what I can to keep it that way until I
Hmm.
find those first customers. So until I got the first sponsor. So I've had a couple of collaborations like that. I have one that's ongoing now, and I'm relying on
Yep.
that to self-fund the process as I build it up. So, I could have gone in one of two directions, right? I could have taken this sort of slow roll approach to build it up that way, which is what I did. Or I could have said, well, let me go big to start with, right? Which would have
Hmm.
required finding some investors or some way to kind of raise some extra funds to
Right.
do that. So I opted to go with the slow roll approach to build it up organically that way.
Awesome.
But yeah, so that
Awesome.
means kind of wearing almost all the hats all the time.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, who's doing the editing hat? I mean, that's a pretty onerous piece
I
all
do
by
all the
itself.
editing. So
You,
I'll tell you that I think the timing for a lot of these things always seems to matter, right? So I find that we coincidentally happen to be in a technology space right now where the tools have gotten so good
hmm.
that the amount of work required has dramatically gone down from what it used to be. So even in the 5 years I've been doing this, originally you really had to understand audio production and audio editing.
Hmm.
And at first I did audio only for the podcast.
Hmm.
Now I'm doing audio and video. And video makes it, I would say, 10x harder to produce and edit than audio. I'm sure you would say the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. But I find like, I've really researched and spent time and experimenting with all the different tools as they become available to find what are the ones that are going to save me the most time
Hmm.
and be the most effective.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of allowed me to really spend less time. I would say probably when I started, I had a long format that was about an hour long episode.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I switched to video, it probably took at least, I would say 10, 12 hours editing every
Wow.
episode. I mean, it was very detailed.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably say, on average now, it's less than half that
Mm-hmm.
for an episode now, and sometimes even less. And two of the four shows that I do are a shorter 20-minute format, so they're much easier
Mm-hmm.
uh, to edit. So they usually only take maybe a couple hours of work to do that. And thanks to a lot of the capabilities and these tools that are out there with AI, it's becoming a lot easier to do that editing without having to get into the deep weeds of the editing process. And so I definitely am thankful for all the tools that are out there. But that's actually one of the things that I found is you have to be willing to experiment with these things because it's never quite clear. There's so many tools that come out to do this.
There's
You
so
have
many
to spend
different
some
ways
time
to do
playing
the
around,
same thing.
experimenting.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Um, do you find yourself in a space where there's competition, or do you find that are kind of the lone voice
Hmm.
in this particular niche?
So it's a bit of a mix. So there are
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot of other podcasts and
Mm-hmm.
equivalent media sources, right? That the technology vendors that I'm going after as customers are can
Mm-hmm.
choose from.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, to be honest, I was in marketing before I was doing this, and I actually used a lot of them as the marketer,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was the one buying their services, so I know a lot
Mm-hmm.
about them. I know most of the people who also do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I kept the list of how many retail podcasts are there, and when I got over 100, I stopped keeping track because the list was getting too long. It was too hard
Yeah.
to list them all. Of those, I mean, there may be over 100, but there are probably only, I would say, a couple dozen that have actually monetized it and are treating it like a business. So, on the one hand, you could call them competitors. It's interesting. We all know each other and we all support each other in this. The general consensus is it's not a zero-sum game like there's this tiny
Mm-hmm.
pie that we're all trying to go after. It's pretty big and
Mm-hmm.
it's always growing because there are
Mm-hmm.
always new people entering the industry who want to sell to retail, who need to raise brand awareness, who are looking to add podcasts as a resource in their go-to-market. So the total market is always growing for this. It really comes down to things like if someone's shopping for that, well, who's cheaper? Who's more expensive? Who has the audience they want to reach? So that's where I find the most challenge is trying to prove to someone, here's who is in my audience, and why you should believe that this is my audience, and why and how does that align with who you want to reach, is what it comes down to. So there's a little bit of competition, but sometimes we actually work together and collaborate together, even though you might
Mm-hmm.
say we compete, but because we all know each other and have kind of been in this industry for a long time together, we kind of treat it like it's a small world.
I think the word I've heard is coopetition in
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what makes you, and I think you've started to allude to it, what makes you stand out? Why would somebody in
Mhm.
the industry make the call to you and
Mm.
decide you're
Yeah.
the one?
Yeah. So I've really chosen to anchor on a few key topical themes
Mm-hmm.
that kind of define who I'm targeting. So if I look at across the four shows, or I mentioned one of them really focuses in on a technology strategy. How should you, if you're a retail executive, how should you be thinking about using a new technology? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the other let's call them for the moment, right? Competitive podcasts, right? They focus more on what I call news of the week, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that there's always something in the news of retail like Amazon, Walmart, any of the big retail brands, and there's always a lot to talk about to kind of compare what they're doing with what you believe you think other retailers should do. And I would say probably half the podcasts out there, that's what they focus on. So
Mm-hmm.
their audience is just interested in hearing what's the latest and greatest that I should be
Mm-hmm.
aware of as an industry leader. So I
Mm-hmm.
intentionally don't do that so that I'm not competing with that, right? I go a little deeper and I say, well, okay, there's some obvious trends in the industry. What are some of the things that if someone is looking at that technology from a new perspective, like I don't know how I should use it, I try to cover, and bring in guests to answer, well, what should you be thinking about? If you're, the CIO and you're trying to define a strategy around that technology for your team, what are the questions that should be going on in your head? And where do you find answers to that? So I take that perspective and try to build the content around that. And I seek out people that I think would be a good voice for that to provide that kind of as guidance. So rather than just being, informing people on what's out there, which I think a lot of the shows do. And frankly, a lot of those shows are really good at it. So I don't want to compete with them because I'm not going to do it better than they are. So I
Mm-hmm.
recognize that they're good at that. That's their sweet spot. I'm going to leave them there. Where I think the gap is, there's not a lot of people focusing on what's the real strategy they have to think of from a leadership perspective.
Good.
And then I have other shows that I think are different. There's a lot of industry analysts that are constantly creating new research around implementation strategies, technologies, operational processes that retail executives should think about. But the analyst business is all built around selling research, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so again, I'm not trying to create the research because again, they're really good at that. They're going to do it better
Mm-hmm.
than I would. So I try to partner with those industry analysts and say, what I'm offering is giving them another outlet to reach their target audience,
Mm-hmm.
because this happens to be the same audience I'm trying to reach. But I try to make their research a little more accessible through conversation. And again, I feel like that's different than what a lot of other podcasts do, where even if they create their own research, and some of them run their own podcasts, and
Mm-hmm.
they focus on all the nitty gritty in the weeds of the data results, where
Mm-hmm.
I might, when I bring in those folks in the show, I say, well, what's one key topic, one key insight that comes from all those hundreds of pieces of data? And we don't
Mm-hmm.
go through like, what are the 100 pieces of data? Because if you're the COO of a retailer, you don't care.
Mm-hmm.
The actual
Right.
data points don't matter. What matters is what does that mean I should do as a
Mm-hmm.
result of that research? And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we then focus in and talk about. So I very specifically try to take that approach, which I don't feel there's a lot of podcasts that speak to the audience in that way.
Awesome. Awesome. So if I understand that, you're trying to take the jargon out of
Hmm.
the people who are speaking to themselves
Yeah, yeah,
thinking and try
yeah.
to translate it into English
Right.
so that a layperson who doesn't
Hmm.
know the jargon can
Hmm.
use it.
Yeah,
Awesome,
yeah,
awesome,
yeah, yeah. We
very
we
good.
kind of call when I started this up, I kind of called it cutting through the clutter.
Uh-huh.
Because what happens is, and I kind of feel this because I've always been on that retail technology vendor side
Mm-hmm.
of the industry. So I know how this works, right? If you, when you're the
Mm-hmm.
technology vendor, you have to highlight what's unique about your
Mm-hmm.
technology. You have to highlight what it allows the customer to do that they couldn't do before. So it
Mm-hmm.
inevitably means you've got to create a language
Mm-hmm.
around that, right, to differentiate yourself. And so now what I'm saying to my audience is, look, I get it. I know that that's a lot of technical jargon. It's a lot of details and bits and bytes, and you just want to get to the end and say, okay, why does this matter to me? And
Mm-hmm.
what is it? What's the outcome I'm going to gain if I do this? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm trying to jump to with the podcast content.
Fantastic, fantastic. As you've been down this journey, you've had a handful of hurdles you've had to
Mm.
grow through.
Hmm.
What would you say is one of the more memorable hurdles that you've had
Mm.
to
Yeah,
go through?
I'd say the biggest challenge is how do I reach a bigger audience, right? So it's
Mm,
the name of the game here, essentially, right? Is I want the audience to be as big as possible because that's what anyone who's going to come in as a sponsor wants to hear.
hmm
And what I kind of realized is it really matters how you tackle that as a challenge, meaning I
hmm
can either say, okay, my end goal here is biggest possible audience,
hmm
which generally is what you expect most podcasts on to say. And the revelation for me was, well, that's not really what I'm looking for because if I think of, well, how big is the universe of people I'm trying to reach? If with everything I just described, right, about what our approach is and who we're speaking to, it's that senior leadership piece at these retail organizations. Well, that's not 5 million people. So I'm not trying to reach. I know that we're never, this is not never going to be a podcast network that reaches 1 million people because there are not 1 million retail leaders in
Are
that
there
in that
5,000 retail
there
leaders?
are probably, yeah, the number's probably more, 5,000. You can make an argument 10 to 15,000 maybe if you
hmm
think, I primarily try to target North America, like US, Canada. But I
hmm
know we have a lot of listeners in the UK, Australia, Germany and Scandinavian countries, even some in South America. Uh, so, if I broaden it that way and consider it globally, okay, 15,000, maybe 20, 25, but it's not even going to be 100,000 people.
hmm
And I kind of, the sort of the light bulb moment for me was, well, if I think about this, when I was the marketer at one of these technology companies, we had a customer database, right? And a target database. And I knew, for example, okay, we were trying to reach large enterprise retailers in North America. Well, that database was no bigger than 3,000 company names. So you do some simple back of the napkin math, right? If there are 3,000 company names, are there more than 50 executives at each one of those? Probably not even that. It's probably 25 executives at each one at most. So you do that math, you quickly see, okay, this is not an audience of a quarter million people. It's not even
Mm-hmm.
100,000 people. It's maybe
Mm-hmm.
15 to 20,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I finally kind of realized that, okay, then my approach is not the same as a podcast that's trying to reach, an everyday consumer audience, right? Where
Right.
they really need to be discovered by a million fans. That's not what I'm doing, right? I had to realize that's not my goal. That means my approach is not the same. And I like a lot of people, I think in any business you start, right, you try to find what information is out there from other people who've done this, right, that you can learn from. So I spent a lot of time looking at, who are all these other podcasters who have grown and done these things, and they all talk about the 100 different things they've done. But then I realized, well, okay, but they did that because their goal was to get to 100,000 people or
Mm-hmm.
500,000. Yeah, that's not my goal. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to copy their approach is not going to work for me. And I had to
Right.
recognize that, well, I need to stop trying to be that
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going down the wrong path. So that to me was the biggest learning is that um, there are bits and pieces I can take from their approach, but I kind of have to define my own approach because this is different. And that's when I realized, what I'm really trying to do is if I look at the other retail podcasts that are kind of in my space, what have they done? What did I learn from them? So I realized that the best source of information was actually in my own network of people who have done this. And because we all know each other, there is a willingness to share because we're not all trying to reach, it's okay if we all reach the same audience.
It's for a different purpose.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
selling something different.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Kind of flipping that around. If you look ahead 5 to 10 years, where do you
hmm
see it? Where do you see the business going? Where do you see the podcast getting to?
Yeah, so I have thought about that. So given what right, well, I just said right, it's in that sense a limited audience. So I have these four podcasts that go that I at the moment at least I think they have, a good at least two of them I think can run indefinitely. I'm always going to have content. Two of the two short format ones I have, do I think I'll still be doing them 5 years from now? Maybe I'll have replaced them with a different theme
Mm-hmm.
by then because it might, the runway may kind of run out for those. What I
Mm-hmm.
really think ultimately the big growth is if I make it successful enough that I can kind of have a team that keeps the flywheel spinning so we keep producing these episodes. The real reason to build a podcast network is to bring in other people who are creating their own podcasts and associate with your podcast network basically as an affiliate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of share in the sponsorship revenue that way, and you bring added audience pieces that maybe reach a different segment. So I
Mm-hmm.
think my long-term vision in that sense, what is it 5 and 10 years from now? It's truly building out that network aspect of it and having other people want to come and become part of the network where those are going to be shows that I'm not the one producing them, I'm not hosting them, someone else is. But we have a reason to be connected and be part of the same
Mm, good. 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 What do you see as the main challenges to do that?
network. Uh, it's sort of an extension of the probably the main challenge I have now, which is finding enough sponsors, right, to keep everything funded and to keep everything
Mm-hmm.
going and to make it attractive, right? So if I think in terms of if I wanted to be an affiliate to another podcast network, what do I expect to get from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm kind of giving up potential sponsorship dollars as an affiliate, but at the same time, I'm hoping that that network has a better ability to reach potential sponsors than I do on my own. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's still the challenge, and that'll still be the challenge is to make sure how do I know that all of those potential target sponsors that I are my direct customer, how are they going to know we exist? How are they going to trust that we reach their audience? What are the proof points going to be, and how do I keep
Mm-hmm.
building those to
Mm-hmm.
continuously prove that yes, this is the audience you want to reach?
Good. 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 Just kind of thinking back now, you've learned a bunch of lessons
Hmm.
along this way. If you started your business today,
hmm
are there things you would do differently?
Most likely. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think there was sort of an advantage. I said originally that I started this out as a side project and a hobby and then decided to turn it into a business. At the same time, there were some downsides to that because there
Mm-hmm.
are things I didn't realize how important they would be because I was treating it like a hobby for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, right, the first thing you get asked as a podcast looking for a sponsor is, well, what can you tell me about your audience? Give me some numbers around, your typical audience size. What segment are they? Do you know what kind of people they are, where they sit in a retailer's organization, how many monthly downloads do you get, what geographies are they coming from? There's a lot of data around that that you
Mm-hmm.
can put together. Unfortunately, in podcasting, not enough data as you would like to have that gives enough detail for what marketers want. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I didn't have ready at the beginning was a good way to present that information.
Mm-hmm.
So basically having, if you treat this like a media business, you need a media kit that
Mm-hmm.
is like your go-to reference, right? It's maybe a
Mm-hmm.
one or two pager that you can give to any marketer that gives them all the highlights they want to know right away.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't build that right away. And I should have, that's the lesson I
Mm-hmm.
learned is, well, that should have been the first thing I did
Mm-hmm.
was to have that ready to go versus, my thought process originally was I'm just going to talk to people and tell them what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
And that story was going to be enough. And at the end of the day, well, I should have thought of it. Well, if I had flipped this around and I was on the receiving end of that, would I have signed up? And probably the answer is no. I would have asked a lot of questions like that, to get more detail. And then I realized, yeah, I guess, and I don't have that detail prepared yet. So that kind of change, I would have changed the order in which I did these things. So I've done them now, but I didn't have that at the beginning, and I should have.
Yeah, these are the lessons that you got.
Yeah.
Kind yeah, I mean, you alluded to it there. Transitioning from a hobby to a business is
Mhm.
a huge mindset
Yeah.
transition. It's a
Yeah.
different focus. It's a different intention,
Hmm.
different set of goals. So
Yeah.
you need different things depending on which way you're playing that. That's good. That's a good insight. So, Bert, in the interest of time, it's probably a good time to start heading towards wrapping up. Let's
Mm.
try a few rapid fire
Okay.
questions and just see what we can play with here. What would you say has been your key to success?
Mm. I for me, because of how I've built this, it really is about what's the message and insights coming from the content I'm creating. Because if that's
Mhm.
not resonating with the target audience, then obviously
Ooh,
it's not going to be successful ever. No one's going
yeah,
to want to sponsor
right.
that. So that's been the big thing is, how do I get that feedback? Because what's interesting with this podcast medium, right, is it's not very interactive. from from that point of view. So getting the feedback, and I feel I'm fortunate that I know a large enough number of retailers that I do get a lot of personal outreach from folks who are listening, who
Yep.
tell me, "Oh, that episode was amazing. It made me think about things that I wasn't thinking about," and I really take advantage of that because it helps kind of guide me as to where do we go next for
Yeah,
topics and
good.
things. So I think that's really important.
That is an important insight. Yeah, that's very good. That's good. If you and I were at the coffee shop, just sitting there chatting, and somebody walked in talking about a business he was getting ready to start up,
Mm.
talking to his friend about it, is there one piece of advice you would want to share with him
Mm.
based on your experience?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it's probably would be in the form of a question where I'd
Hmm.
ask, how much time are you really willing to commit every day?
That's a good one.
And I say that because I'm not sure I had a sense, and you kind of asked me the right question earlier about like the how much time do I spend on production, right? Because knowing
Hmm.
that that's time consuming, I didn't have that mapped out as well as I should have in the
Hmm.
beginning. It took me a while to learn, like I said, how to spend time looking for the right production tools, the right technology pieces. Since I'm not relying on investment dollars to build
Hmm.
this out, I have to find everything myself. And
Hmm.
so efficiency is huge, huge important. I have to know
Hmm.
where I'm spending the time.
Hmm.
So that's something I would say to someone is think really hard about how much time you can commit to it because whatever number you think that is, it's probably going to be more.
I think that's a high likelihood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What is a book you're reading now or have been reading recently that's having
Mhm.
impact on how you're driving this business?
Mm. So it's actually there's a book by one of the retail a former retail executive that I know well who wrote a book. It's actually his second book about frontline store teams and how
Hmm.
what it's like to work in stores from an executive's perspective.
Hmm.
And his recent book's called Human Pride. He actually
Hmm.
expanded it. The author's Ron Thurston. He expanded it to be not just about kind of retail frontline, but any kind of equivalent job like that, where
Hmm.
you're not in control of what corporate does. Um, and really, what I've kind of been learning from that is a lot of good things that kind of have guided some of the topics that I use to build out the content
Hmm.
for that. So one of the pieces that we say, I mentioned before, we started out with the theme around cutting through the clutter in
Hmm.
that technology piece. And one of the things that I kind of shifted to along the way a little bit is to say, it's not just about when we say technology strategy, there's actually two pieces to that. One is the technology itself and how it's
Mm-hmm.
going to improve the business. But the other half of that is what's the impact on the people in the business
Mm.
when you hand them the technology to use?
Mm-hmm.
And most corporate leaders don't think about that. And that
That's
was one of
true.
the
Yeah.
things that I was learning from reading his book that made me think, we need to talk about that more because retail is a people business. Despite everything everyone reads in the news about how everybody buys things online and everything, 80, almost 85% of all retail sales still happen in stores, which means you're
Mm-hmm.
interacting with people in a
Mm-hmm.
physical space. And
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to get overwhelmed by bright, shiny new technology objects and think, oh, this is fantastic. It's going to improve our business. But if you don't consider what's the impact on the people, and it's really almost two sides to that. It's customer and your employees.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that make them feel? Because it's a people business, the emotion matters.
Mm-hmm.
The emotional state of the employees and affects how they present the brand to the customer, and the
Mm-hmm.
customer's emotional response to that is what builds the brand relationship that makes them keep coming back or not. And obviously, you need them to come back if you want to sell things. So
Yeah.
that kind of provided a lot of guidance. And so, that's a conversation that there are not a lot of podcasts doing, and that gave us gave me a really unique angle to take in all the technology conversations we do.
Yeah, I can recall in past decades user acceptance.
Mm.
And you're
Mhm.
right. It's not just
Yeah.
the employee user,
Hmm.
but the customer who is at the consequence end
Yeah.
of the employee
Right.
acceptance too. Yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
Exactly.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
You've had a great journey. What are you most proud of in accomplishing what you've accomplished so far?
Um, I would say it's part of it is some of the recognition for the podcasts we've done. So like in the last few months, for example, we hit a couple of really significant milestones.
Mhm.
One was our YouTube channel actually hit or crossed the 100,000 views a month barrier,
Very good.
which was huge for us. That's in
Hmm.
fact has turned into my main channel now is the YouTube channel versus the all the other podcast distribution. And then the other milestone we have is on one of the podcast platforms, Good Pods. They do a lot of interesting charts around, top podcast charts and 100 different categories.
Hmm.
And we actually hit a milestone in the last 2 months now where when we had a new episode out within, I'd say, a 2 week period across all four of the podcasts,
Hmm.
we actually hit the top four positions, one, two, three, and four, in both the business management and business marketing charts for top podcasts of the week and top podcasts of the month at the same time, 2 months in a row.
Very good.
So that was really a really huge accomplishment for me. I consider that a major milestone because it's four shows and we got the top four spots on that platform. So that says a lot to me about how people are, accepting the content and want to hear more from it.
Also says something about YouTube.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Really, that's been an effective channel for a lot of
Yeah,
people. Yeah, that's very
yeah.
good. Following up, just for fun, if you could flip that question around,
Mm,
if you could significantly improve one aspect of your business
mm,
tomorrow,
mhm.
what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the number one thing I would look at is that I don't feel like I've really solved is so despite those two milestones, I still see my number one challenge is distribution.
Hmm.
How do I make sure that the content we're creating is getting to the right audience? So like that audience we
Hmm.
talked about before, the 10 to 15,000 people, how many of them am I really getting to? And what's the mechanism I need to reach it? Because the fact is today there is so much content out there, you can't reach a target audience organically. You have to figure out where's the right spend you have to do on advertising, promotion, and things to get to them. And that to me is the number one that if I needed to do differently or I feel like I haven't quite found the right formula yet, I know that there's still room to grow there. And that's the number one thing that, if I had to change anything or wanted to do over, I would probably tackle that a little differently to see if I can get a different result.
Good, 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 good. That's actually important
Yeah.
for many businesses. That's not just your business. That's almost any business.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah. So, most important question:
Mm.
how can people who want to know more connect with
Mhm.
you?
Oh, yeah. So a couple different ways. And there's our website is retailrazor.com.
Hmm.
So you can find out everything there is to know about the podcast network. All of our episodes are available there, both audio and video. As
Hmm.
links to the YouTube channel, everything is there. And then I can be reached on LinkedIn is usually the best way. Just find me
Hmm.
as Ricardo Belmar on LinkedIn. The Retail Razor also has a company page on LinkedIn, so those are great ways to reach out to me that way.
Fantastic, fantastic. And last question, what's most inspiring to you today?
Mm. Um, I have an interesting answer to that. So I've always been working in the technology space and primarily, the last 2.5 decades focused on retail technology.
Hmm.
Um, the technology itself, in a way, often inspires me because I'm
Hmm.
really, now of course everything is about AI, um, and it has pluses and minuses, good and
Hmm.
bad things. But I still find it inspiring because, partly because I find so much benefit from this technology
Hmm.
myself in this
Hmm.
business. It's, I could probably make an argument that says if it weren't for AI tools, I probably couldn't sustain this business right now without an outside investment.
Hmm.
So that's important. But then at the same time, I think for this industry that I'm serving in this retail, I do think that the technology is inspiring and all of the new things that these businesses are going to be able to do. I recognize a lot of people are afraid of that in the
Hmm.
sense that, could it cost them their job? But I actually think that right now, um, there's a good argument to be made that the path is not going to go negative. It's going to be positive and really allow things to get, to build a better environment for those businesses, both for employees and for customers. So I get inspired by that. It makes me want to do more and dig deeper into it.
Yeah. Yeah, on your point about AI, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I buy into the theory that there's going to be fewer jobs. I'm kind of
Hmm.
thinking about it's going to be that the jobs are redefined.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
and
agree.
and the analogies that's coming to my mind is back in the 70s when and early 80s when desktop computers were
Mm.
first starting to
Hmm.
show up. Everybody said, "Oh, this was going to be the end of this job, that job, or
Yeah.
this other job."
Right.
No, the roles changed.
Right.
The number of jobs increased.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit premature to judge outcomes that we haven't
Yeah,
seen
I,
yet.
I agree. I think it's just the scale of change. It's like every time we have one of these new technologies, it's like a huge step function forward in the
Hmm.
amount of simultaneous change. And I think that's what always bothers everyone is that, because change can be scary. So
You can. Yeah, well,
that's
it
natural.
is
Yeah,
because it's changed.
exactly. Yeah,
That's been fantastic. This has been a great conversation. I think you've really touched on several really important points that any business should be thinking about. Not the least of which is who's your target market really, and
yeah,
how do I find them instead of
right.
just everybody and anybody. I think that's a really important aspect of this
Yeah,
game. So that's been fantastic. For everybody watching, I encourage you to save the show, come back, and re listen to what Ricardo's had to say. He shared some really good insights along the way. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can get notifications every time a new conversation like this one drops. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And a special thank you for Ricardo, who came in here, was vulnerable, shared a bunch of insights. And I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
thank you for having me. Appreciate it.